Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is John Reilly, the writer of Herald, Lovecraft and Tesla. John, welcome to the show.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
What can you tell us about Herald?
Herald is a history mashup horror adventure miniseries that's kind of taken most of your history books from the 20s and kind of throwing them into a blender, and then throwing in the Cthulhu mythos of H.P. Lovecraft, so the monsters, the magic, the madness, that sort of thing.
Interesting. One of the things that I got a chuckle out of when I was reading the book was that you incorporate, as you said, a lot of historical figures from the 20s and 30s, and I believe Albert Einstein is a supporting character in the book, working in a patent office. So I'm just wondering, when you were coming up with the idea for this, how did you decide to pick these characters? What inspired you?
So at first, I just kind of threw everybody that I could think of and everyone I could research together in a room, and sort of had this kind of mental American Idol audition where each person would step in front, and I'd say, all right, who are you? What do you do? What can you bring to the story? Why do we need you in here? And we'd say, all right, well, I already have a couple other scientists. What do you do different than them? Like, what can you do for the themes that I'm trying to work with? And some of them didn't pass the cut, and some of them did. And Einstein was a pretty clear winner for his obvious historical significance.
So, in writing this story, you have Tesla, who is, I guess, kind of down on his luck at the beginning of the story, and some crazy things start to happen. So, how do you take someone like Tesla and turn him into a fictionalized version of himself and combine it with the Lovecraftian world and include, as a matter of fact, Lovecraft himself in the story?
I think a lot of that's, it's probably easier than you might think, because so much of what people know of some of these historical characters like Tesla is based on the kind of mythology that we've built around them. So if you know all the details, if you know the actual life of him, and he was a really interesting, obviously brilliant guy, but some of the stuff that people kind of attribute to him, this sort of, mythical mad scientist, you can just kind of play into what we already think of these characters, and then some of the stories kind of start, at least for me, they feel like they start writing themselves, because you know he's going to do something with wireless electricity, he's going to do something, and then once you add the fantasy element of Lovecraft and magic and these demons and monsters and stuff, the door just kind of blasts open, and you can talk about anything you want.
Well, really, what I know about Tesla either comes from the band Tesla or from David Bowie's performance in The Prestige. But let's talk about the character of Tesla, because, as I say, he starts off sort of down on his luck. How do you develop a character based on a real person, where you're obviously changing? You didn't know Tesla. Most of what we know about him is probably going to be slanted one way or the other. How do you create a character in a story based on a real person?
Yeah, so the first step is going through the history books and finding all these details about it that you may or may not use, but it's important to, the more that you're able to kind of clump all this together in your head, an actual person starts to form, not just a list of facts and accomplishments, but you start thinking, if he did this, and if this was his reaction to so-and-so, then this is probably the kind of person he is. And then once you can kind of filter that through, I guess, what you'd need for a regular narrative, instead of just throwing these people into an environment and hoping that the story comes out correct, you really start thinking about what do they care about, and how would that be influenced by another character. So some of those things you need to play around with. For one thing, his workshop in the very beginning is very cluttered, and a lot of people said there's no, he would never be that messy. And you're right, he was pretty meticulous. So one of the other things I'm doing is trying to show how that may have happened, how that OCD he has may have happened. So there's an explanation for that later on. So we start off messy, and then we give him some room to grow. And the same for Lovecraft with some of his obvious, racial and anti-Semitism beliefs. We kind of start off with that, but then we give him some because I don't want to ignore it, but then we make some progress as the story progresses. Characters have to change.
Absolutely. So you're saying that when you were writing this, you were trying to keep it as close to their real personalities as possible and address some actual issues in their lives. And it wasn't something like, let's say, a Bill and Ted's where they have Sigmund Freud, enjoying a corn dog or something.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of, what people that haven't done any research on them, and I admit I hadn't done anything before starting any of this. If you just ask what kind of person would Tesla be or what are they famous for, so there's that kind of cultural weight that they already have, that people already think they know about them. You couple that with what the actual history books say, which may or may not be the actual truth, but it's the record that we have to go with, and then you add that to just the regular demands of what a story needs if it's going to be a functioning story. So I guess it's those three things kind of mixed up, and that's how you put it all together. It's not just one; they kind of have to work together.
Now, you were talking about having the characters develop, and how basically in a story a character needs to learn something to improve, to become, for better or for worse, something needs to happen for them to change. And when you were putting together this story, did you have an idea of how you were going to have these characters change, or was this just something that organically you started to write and then by the end they had that change, or did you have something in mind?
I think I planned that out. One of the very first things that I wrote when I first started jotting notes for this was what that central theme was going to be, and so it was kind of this idea of Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. So Whedon has this beautiful idea that it's most of that show is kind of a metaphor for what it's like to get through high school and college. It's a horror movie to try and survive that kind of growing up process. So my thinking was, what does that look like for people after college? What's the horror movie metaphor that people post 20 whatever are dealing with? And so this idea of this kind of cult, what I refer to in my head as the cult of adulthood, this kind of of course you have to get a very fancy job, and of course you have to get married, of course you have to have lots of babies, and of course you have to buy lots of nice things. So it became a lot easier once that horror metaphor for adulthood kind of crystallized, so that the characters could the point that they're starting at is one of they don't want to fit in with the society, or at least the way that the society wants people to fit in. You have two people who are incredibly bright, who are very competent at what they do, but it doesn't quite fit in with the way that the world kind of expects you to be. Tesla really has no interest in making money off of his inventions. He's very arrogant, and Lovecraft may be an interesting writer, but he's writing in little pulp indie comics, and he's never gonna be able to support himself with that. So it's kind of taken a lot of what myself and my friends have as this, how do nerds fit in? How do dorks fit in as they get older, when you have all these pressures to be to fit in a particular way? So that's their starting point, and then how they change based on some not so magical occurrences and some crazy demon fights and whatever other nutsy stuff I throw at them. So that's their starting point. That's where they end up with figuring out how they need to fit in with the society that doesn't exactly accept them for who they are.
That's interesting, because a lot of times we are consuming media, whether it's reading, whether it's a television program, and we don't understand, or we don't necessarily think that characters need to have some sort of change as they go through. And that was the first thing that you were thinking of when you were putting your story idea together, was how can these characters, what's that central theme that these characters will have to explore throughout the course of the story. Now, you were telling me before we started the show that this is the first work that you've done in comics. So how do you go from having an idea in, let's say, your living room, to having it published so that it can be in everyone's living room?
I may not be the right person to ask, because like I said, this is the first comic I've ever written. It's the first piece of fiction I've ever published. And it started off as a really excited idea one night with some notes in a living room, and then I probably spent way too much time planning it out and plotting out 54 issues to tell the whole story in 3 big kind of seasonal arcs. and putting a lot of thought into something that was really just a fun hobby for a while. And then we found an artist later on, and then just I don't know, we just won the lottery on finding a couple great artists, Tom Rogers and Dexter Weeks, who do the pencils and the ink and the color and the letters. And then we sent it off to a number of publishers, and Action was cool enough to give us a shot. So the short answer is you just win the lottery. I wish it could be a better. I wish it could be more helpful than that. That's what it feels like, because it's.
Well, it's interesting. There are so many different stories that you hear about people getting into the comic industry, and I think Mark Waid once said that, it's like breaking out of jail. By the time you figure out a way out, no one else can get through that.
They've plugged that hole.
Portal.
Yeah.
So some people, they talk about how they go to the cons and they're able to show their work to some editors who happen to be at the show, and that leads to some sort of connection. So when you put together your submission, what sort of steps did you go through?
So and this was funny because they asked for you're going to need to write a little blurb about yourself, about the other people working for you, and you also need to write a synopsis of what the whole thing's going to be. And if I was just submitting 3 issues, it would be really easy to write a quick paragraph that kind of sums up those 66 pages. But I felt like if I just give them that, it's not. If I can present the bigger picture, the whole thing, this could be really enticing. And then it became, this incredibly stressful thing of trying to figure out how to put 54 issues into less than a page of, like, you're not going to read 20 pages of, and then this person that you remember from 4 pages, they're reading through so many submissions. You just got to get all the really important stuff in and out. So we sent them the last 6 pages of the first issue, which I thought was a nice taste for that scene there, a nice taste of who these 2 people are, how they're going to be operating dynamically, and I thought it ended on a nice twist. And if that kind of hooked them, then maybe they'd want to see more. And then it was because I'm a writing teacher, so it was just kind of obsessively revising and rewriting and looking over the synopsis and the submission, and just making sure that every word was about as perfect as I could possibly get, to make sure that we really sold ourselves as well as we could without overdoing it.
What's interesting, you say that you're a writing teacher, and one of the things that we see is you're taking a very careful and methodical approach to your writing, and you talk about something that I think a lot of aspiring writers don't necessarily think about, which is the revision process, the sitting down, looking at your work with sort of a cool, unattached eye, so that way you can see it for the way it really is rather than the way we perceive it. As a writer, we kind of get into that, I'm staring at that page for so long I don't see the whole story, and you can kind of miss typos for one thing or plot holes for another. So when you were writing this and coming up with the synopsis that you were revising and refining, how long did that process take?
Oh, I don't know. I think I went through at least 6 or 7 separate, completely different synopses, where one was kind of each issue was given one sentence. I tried it that way. I tried it where each what I ended up settling on. I think there's 3 big arcs, 3 big seasons of 18 issues each, and I figured if I just had to squeeze all that down into a few sentences of one paragraph for that, what's the most important part that hits there? Because the first couple of times you do it, you really, what Peter Elbow says, you need to use this believing and doubting game, where the first time you write through something, just shut off everything that's going to say no and just get it out. Just write as much as you possibly can. You just need material to work with. And then when you come back to it, you actually need to put it aside, which means you can't do it the night before the assignment's due. You put it aside and you're actually revision. You're actually seeing it again for the first time. Then you start playing that doubting game where you've had some time to detach yourself from it. You look back at it and you say, that's not, even if it's just a simple, like I can cut a couple words out of that sentence and it still sounds the same way. If I can just trim that up, I can just make that a little clearer. You just keep kind of chipping away at it, and you realize that first draft that you had was just a big blob, and then the more you chip and edit at it, the more it starts to look like, the statue of David or whatever you were planning. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because when you engage in a process like this, there is the possibility that you're going to overthink something, and maybe an idea that has a certain rawness to it becomes too polished, and it loses that rawness, at least in the reading. So I was just wondering, when you're working on something like this, how do you know when it's time to stop chipping away at David?
The short answer is I don't, and I probably overthink way too much because I'm so much more concerned with being smart and clever and pointing to something later on and saying, you see how I put a little hint to this that comes up later here. And I the same way that I want that teachers want their students to do a close reading of a book because we're gonna, you see how this symbol worked, you see how this metaphor was carried through the whole way. I'm trying to do that myself, and I may be overdoing it. I'm almost certainly overthinking it. So I don't have the answer to your question. How do you just let go? The short answer is I know to let go when the due date approaches. I just like someone, I can't remember who said, it's no piece of writing is ever finished. It's just abandoned. The due date comes and I have to submit something. I can't. I would keep working on it if I could, but you want someone to read it at some point.
It's interesting when you talk about, I guess, those little hints that we as writers put into our stories, so that way later on people can say, aha. If you have the opportunity, I don't know if you've seen any of the Seth Rogen, James Franco films. In every one of their films, this came to me the other day, I was watching the interview, which, but what's interesting about it is they tell you in the film exactly how it's going to end, and it's in a scene where you just think, that's ridiculous. It's just a joke. And then as the movie ends, you're like, oh, wait a minute, they told us exactly how it's going to end.
I haven't seen that. I'll have to check that out. That sounds great.
But let's talk about putting together Herald. You said that you had two great artists that you worked with. Were these people that you went out and found and you got the book put together before you started soliciting it to the publishers, or was this something where you waited till you had some firm commitment? Because I'm imagining that there's a financial component to hiring an artist that is a little, costly.
It's too much if you don't have a promise of being published. So after much discussion, my wonderful wife agreed that we could pay these artists for the 6 pages just for that submission packet, and I let them know, if it gets picked up, we're co-creators. We're doing this together now. We're a team, and they were fantastic with that. And we worked out a deal, and they're really amazing guys to work with. We've been really lucky because so many books, so many things don't get made because, for perfectly legitimate reasons, the artists aren't able to finish it up because, like you said, doing a full page of a comic could take, anywhere from 6 on the short end to 10 hours. And if that's 10 hours of unpaid time, there's a lot of reasons why an artist is going to say, well, I've got other paying work here, so I can't do your free hobby book. But if you get people who are committed to it and people who are just fantastically professional, like these two, like Tom and Dex, it's really a pleasure to work with.
Well, it is interesting when we take a look at some of the older comics that are out there. You'd find an artist like a Jack Kirby who would be working on 3 or 4 books a month, and they'd be these pages that are just exploding with energy. And clearly he wasn't skimping, on any of the detail work. And it just makes you scratch your head and say, how in the world do you do, 80 pages a month? That you figure out the math, it's just like 4 pages a day or something along those lines.
It's absolutely insane to think that someone has been practicing and doing it that long that some of these things just become instinct. It's wonderful. We can only hope.
So how do you find these artists? Do you put an ad up on a message board somewhere, or you...
So we went to some conventions and we walked around to some tables, and at the time I was still I had no idea how any of this worked, so I would give them this big, long, complicated pitch about the themes and that whole Joss Whedon adulthood thing, and everyone's like, what I really need to do is just walk up to the table and say, look, scientists, and a horror writer, and they're just going to be fighting monsters and stuff. How's that sound? You want to do that? So instead, we ended up going through DeviantArt and looked at a whole lot of profiles and a whole lot of portfolios. I mean, hundreds and hundreds, and whittled it down to a certain amount, and then asked them to do just a couple quick character sketches to see if they could get kind of the feel that we were looking for. We didn't want kind of a gritty realism to it because it is an all ages, it's an all ages book, but we didn't want it to look too cartoony. So we got Tom on that, and then Dex is actually somehow related to my wife, and we had originally sent him some of the pages that the script. Dex has been doing comics for the last 15 years or so. We did a few through Image. Evangeline was one of them. And
okay, looks like we're having some more connection issues here. Hopefully they'll clear themselves up. You're watching Comic Culture. Our guest is John Reilly.
and it's
John, we lost you there
sorry.
for a moment there. So you're talking about Dex. He had done some work for Image.
he'd done a couple comics for Image. He's been doing that for 10, 15 years. He did Evangeline. So we sent him some of the pages that we were working on. And the most that I was hoping for was kind of a quick, pat on the back. Yeah, keep it up, kid. Good job. Because he's been in the industry. And instead, he came back a half hour later and said, I got to be on this project. Let's make that happen. So my wife and I kind of looked at each other like, oh, this guy's been doing it for 15 years. He's excited about this. So let's say yes to that.
So you were saying that Herald is an all-ages book, and yet there are some creepy elements in there. There's some exploding creatures. So how do you balance an all-ages book and the requisite sort of gore that would be in a Lovecraftian story?
Yeah, there's gonna be some gore. There's gonna be some stuff. I think the short answer to that is that we're still at a point, I think, where sex is more prohibitive in terms of this rating system than violence is. So we try to make sure that the violence isn't super over the top, gory, terrible. I say all ages. I think PG-13 is probably a closer estimate of it. Action Lab has Action Lab, and then they have the Danger Zone, which is their mature side. They can get away with whatever they want there. The side that I decided that we should be on, and we could have made the decision if we wanted to do creepier, gorier stuff, was to keep it around like a PG-13 primetime TV kind of thing. So some cartoon violence, some gory, goopy horror stuff, but no sex, which I think saves us from censors. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now you said that this is the first 3 issues are just the first arc, and then you have, I believe you said you had 54 issues plotted out. So is this something that's dependent on sales, or is this something where they're just going to let you go ahead and keep playing?
I think it's going to be dependent on sales, but we're already good for the next 3, and for 4, 5, and 6. They're in the pipe now, and we're working on 7, 8, and 9, hoping that it works. I'd rather hope for the best than not hit a deadline. So yeah, it was 54, and we're hoping to get there. I'm nothing if not ridiculously ambitious.
Well, John, we just have a few seconds left. If our viewers wanted to find out more about Herald, do you have a website that they could go to?
Yeah, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. You can email us if you have a letter that you'd like us to print in the back of the comic. We're good for that. It's all Herald Comic, one word, either at gmail.com or Herald Comic on Twitter, or Herald Comic on Facebook, and we're happy to engage with the fans.
Well, that's great. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today on Comic Culture. It's been a lot of fun. And I'd like to thank you at home for watching the show. We'll see you again next time for another exciting episode.